My name is David Schneiderman. I've been an entrepreneur since as young as I can remember. Literally, I think I was 12 years old, and I had a CD burner and made went to HMV, bought CDs, made a mix, and was selling mixes at my school. Quickly figured out that I could sell to one person at different schools who would resell them, and was making a little business since I was 13. Had a bunch since then, and just always been an entrepreneur. Moved out when I was 17, so quite young, and I've just lived a long life of some successful businesses, some huge failures. I've lived in a four-story house with two cars and a motorcycle, and then I've lived back at my grandmother's in my young 30s with negative money to my name. So it's been quite a ride, and now my business partner and I, Joe Angelotti, have a company together called Two Bears. It's been in business since 9 years, and that's I'm a brother and a son of two fantastic parents that are still together in their 70s.
Oh, wow. And like you said, a lot of people I talk to, you kind of have that traditional founders story, or like the thing since a kid, selling the classic, selling the chocolate bars, mowing the lawns. Obviously, as you know, obviously being in the space, like looking from the outside, it's very sexy. Everyone wants to run a startup. Everyone wants to be an entrepreneur. It's because you only see the successes typically because no one's saying, wow, how hard it was. When you were growing up, was there ever consideration that you're like, you know what, maybe this isn't for me. I might want to, take relax a little bit, kind of get more traditional job, or from day one where you're like, there's so much passion for this. This is all I want to do. Or was there some kind of going back and forth throughout those trials and tribulations and through that journey?
I I wanted a job so bad it seems so much easier that there's not the stress and like people think like you said, yeah, it sounds so sexy, but you actually land up working 70, 80 hours. You're
Mhm.
the middle of the night, you're not sleeping, you're thinking about everything. It's so important. And then when you have a team, all the team relies on you. You know, if there's no
Mhm.
payday, if there's no money to pay people, like I mean, the stress is crazy. So I wanted one. I've tried. I mean, like I wouldn't last 2 days. I mean, it wasn't possible.
Mhm.
It's in my.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing. There is like you said, there is a interest, or at least no, I don't say I don't know if it's a personality type, but there is something where like you kind of have to have the passion, kind of have the drive to do it because the stress for a lot of times is not worth it. And for others people, it's just not worth the trade off, especially depending on how you want to live your life. Um, One thing that's kind of interesting is obviously you've done a few other ventures throughout your journey. Coffee, obviously, now is like hot. Everyone, all the celebrities kind of doing the coffee brands. And obviously, over these past years, I mean, coffee has always been a thing, especially being Canadian. You got the Tim Hortons. If you call that coffee, that's another conversation. But
Mhm.
when that came to mind, were you always in like the CP consumer packaged good market? Was this a brand new foray? And like, I mean, using all my old like friends of mine's like, well, there's a Tim Hortons. How are you going to sell this? Kind of how would that end up happening? Because obviously now it's looking back, it looks obvious. There's so many of these niche products, but I'm assuming when you started this wasn't a huge market, especially in that packaged coffee or pre-made coffee. I'm not sure what the vertical is called, but how did that start?
So first and foremost, after some failures, like really painful, ego-shattering financial failures, I had a long, deep talk with myself and realize I can't do things for money. I can't do things because I think it sounds cool. I need to do something that, my dad said that, if you don't enjoy the journey, eventually you get to the destination and you might even get where you want, but what was it worth? And so I realized like I am passionate about meeting new people. I love selling. I love being a salesperson of something I like selling, and I love traveling. And so I was like, and I love health. I've been like kind of in the health buying healthy food and eating healthy since I was like a kid. Moving out even at 17, I could have eaten ramen noodles for cheap, but I was eating, I mean, canned tuna because I mean it was so cheap when I was 17 that but it was still healthy, or I thought it was, whatever. It's another story. But um so one day I was just having a cold brew coffee. Nobody knew what this was 9 years ago. It was actually at a bar. I was like, whoa, what is this? It was so good. And I was like, you know what? If I put this in a bottle and I sold it, eventually, if it does well, I could go traveling to the origins where the farms are. And, since then, I've been to coffee farms in Costa Rica, Colombia, Dominican Republic. And it's been a crazy experience of traveling, meeting new people, and selling something that's healthy. Like everything we make in our whole company now, we've updated as zero refined sugar, natural ingredients. Um, so just passionate about it. It's hitting all the things that were important to me at the time.
Mhm. And obviously, 9 years having quite a bit of success. Obviously, I've seen the product almost everywhere now, especially in the grocery stores, and have had it many times. With the kind of the ebbs and flows of the coffee market or drink market, how do you not say true to yourself, but there's 1,000 options, there's 1,000 flavors, 1,000 ways of doing it. When it comes to obviously like being a founder, kind of growing a business, you can do anything you want realistically. There's no
Mm.
limit. How do you kind of choose what to focus on? Because obviously it has to be true to yourself, but at the same time, the market has some dictation on what they want to buy. How have you been able to balance building products for people they want, but also maybe not getting sucked into the trends, or at least following the trends that are not going to, the unicorn drink one day. I mean, that's a bad example, but like kind of getting to these very small niches with flavoring or kind of how the packaged is done.
You know, I don't know, maybe I have a big ego or something, but I've always kind of done things that I thought were cool and didn't care about others. From being the first kid in school to dye his hair at 13, I had my ears pierced. Like, I mean, so I was always the first one kind of doing stuff, and I didn't care if it was cool or not. I thought it was cool, and so it's kind of the same concept. I believe that if I like this, there's got to be a group of people out there that like this, and my business partner is so similar, and so he likes it. We know we've got something, and so we just kind of believe if we like it, other people will, and then we launch it, and then we listen to what people say, and yeah, okay, it's not sweet enough, it's too sweet, and make uh, adaptations to make it taste better and better. But generally, the concept. So, like, first we were the only cold brew coffee nationally sold across Canada. Then, um, after about 4 or 5 years, we found out there's something called flash brewing, which is brewing with hot water, the way coffee is meant to be brewed, and then flash chilled so it doesn't go bitter over time. So you get all the good oils and sugars extracted that can't be done with cold brew, and then flash chilled, so it's a better iced coffee. So now I think we're still the only flash brewed coffee in Canada. Um, then we realized, okay, we need to put milk and sugar, like a milk or sugar type thing. So we actually use a monk fruit mix, but we did oat milk, and we were the first oat latte in Canada. We're still the only one. Um, and then now we're doing, so many people kept asking us, we're like, we like milk, we like milk. It's 40 times bigger than all the plant-based combined. And so
Wow.
let's say the Starbucks Frappuccino in the glass bottle does just under $500 million dollars a year in sales in North America. It has, I think, 44 grams of sugar in it. People kept saying, like, can't you just make something like that? So we did a lactose-free dairy, clean ingredient, zero refined sugar, drink similar to theirs, and people are freaking out about that. And so we're just kind of rolling with the punches, knowing that if we believe in it, it makes sense.
And I think that is something, especially when you're in a new category. A lot work with a lot of founders is if you're the only ones doing it, you can't really ask your. I hate this saying, but it's like, oh, what do you want? I want a faster horse. Well, then we make the car. It's the same idea. If you're new in a category, a lot of times you have to listen to the pains and find the solutions, but sometimes the product or kind of how you go to market is maybe just never done before. And like you were saying, you know, developing these new methods, kind of be the only ones with that flat the flash chilled
Flash brewing.
coffee. Flash brewing is like one of those
Yeah.
newer processes that create a better product. And I think right now, which is really interesting, is like everyone else, you get into your coffees, is that like the people's interest in coffee also has gone up dramatically over these past 5 years, where they realize like, oh, coffee doesn't have to be horribly bitter, horribly like burnt. There is flavors, and kind of having that quality started becoming almost a new category in itself. And we've seen with that a lot of pop-up stores, but everything else kind of more interest in refining the taste.
Yeah,
When
people are learning more. Sorry to cut you off. I just people are learning more. Like you said, all these cafes are everywhere. And with inflation, people can't spend $15 for a coffee and a croissant anymore. So you have to supply people with crazy quality at a good price. So all of our products are like $3.99, all of our canned drinks. Um, and so like you're getting crazy flash brewed coffee, good quality blend of South American coffee. Like everything we do is trying to like listen and adapt to the consumer. So it all goes back to make what you want and then adapt, listen, and it just never stops at that kind of circle of adapt and listen.
And I think that's such a good way of like kind of running an organization, because you're kind of always sticking to those core values that are consistent no matter what product adaptation or kind of what you do with it. It's always kind of going back to that core. So it's very easy or easier to make decisions then, because you have that solid foundation. When the kind of business was growing, obviously, I know on your LinkedIn, kind of like it was like your first year doing 12,000 in sales. At what point did you start feeling like, okay, we're on to something here? We're getting interest. This is starting to become more of a real business. Was it instantly when you had those few, testers and people really liked it, or did it take a few years to realize like, oh, I'm on, like, this is a legitimate business, we can grow and scale? Kind of when did that transition go from maybe a idea to you're now feeling like you're running a whole organization, or was it pretty early on, or did it take a few months to kind of get the ball rolling?
I only feel it right now. Luckily, I'm a little bit of I guess I'm not very smart, and I'm so like was it pig-headed discipline where I just go in every day and I come with my shovel and I'm willing to work. So I didn't really think about it. I just said in my head, make it better every single day. Better be better than yesterday. And honestly, until very recently, like now, like things are starting to grow exponentially because there's been so many times where like we have growth and then you get hit, which is this crazy curveball, and we're like, oh God, I didn't think of that. Oh my God, that's a huge hit. Oh, now we lost sales for 6 months. And now's the first time like everything is cohesive and it's just this beautiful boat with like is moving with the current and not against the current. So it took 9 years for me to actually feel like this is going to like I always knew it was going to be something. I felt it, but like it's the first time I'm like I actually think I believe it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's one of those things where it's like you need to be a successful founder. You kind of have to have that belief that no one else has. But at the same time, there is a level of realism being like, there is a huge risk going on here. There's a lot of uncertainty, but getting to that point when you're like, okay, things are starting to move those, I guess not, I wouldn't say luck, but things are starting to kind of come together where there is that momentum now. So now it's not, it's the exponential growth, but it takes, like you said, takes years to get there, 9 years to kind of get to that spot. Now it looks like an overnight success, but it's been 9 years
Yeah.
of every day kind of pushing through to get to that level of growth, and especially that the ability to grow that rapidly, especially in the future.
And most people quit before because they're not
Yeah.
willing to put in that. And that would have been me. Now I'm 42. Back in the day, maybe I would have quit before waiting 9 years. Like my whole perspective changed. Whereas now, like, sure, would I love venture capital, a huge exit in this crazy life? Sure. But I like that's all this like I've spoken at like a university and like that's all they were asking me about. How much have you raised? When are you going to exit? And it's like you can't think like that. You'll be miserable. It's 9 years in, and I'm still not putting that much thought into that. Like it's let's just make something incredible and better and bigger and better, and like let's more people enjoy it, and all that stuff will fall into place. Whereas I think if you put too much thought into like VC money and exits and all of that, in my perspective, and I could be completely wrong, but I think you won't make it 9, 10 years if that's all you're thinking about.
it and I've seen the same thing, especially when talking to early founders, when it's like, oh, like what's your plan? Like, okay, I'm trying to raise $1 million and I'm gonna raise 10, $20 million. But you never hear like what problem are you actually solving? And the kind of the goal is to raise more money, but people don't realize the more money you raise, your investors expect 10x in return. It's not free money. And I
Mm.
think that's one of the challenge I talk to a lot of like, first time founders where they raise all this money and then they're like, and they realize, oh shit, I don't own the company. We have board members now. That freedom I thought I was getting isn't there. But now also I have to grow at a pace that may not be sustainable, or I have to make cuts and change. And it's one of those things where you get excited for the big numbers, but at the end of the day, if you don't own the business, kind of why are you doing this? Is it just to make money? Sure, maybe, but if it's to have that passion and really grow something you're proud of, there is other ways, especially with bootstrapping. And it's always interesting, kind of, there's different ways to be successful. And I think having control is rarely do I hear founders saying, I wish I gave up more of my business when I was young, early on. I mean, maybe it's those founders that can say that now. Maybe there's some others who are like, wish they did it because now they're not anywhere. But I think it's one of those things where you don't want to get too built into that excitement of buying the nicest things, because it pays dividends once you're successful. Um,
I hope so. I hope so. A lot of my friends were like, I was. I'm listen. I'm not a jealous person or envious, but I was like, am I making a big mistake?
yeah.
Because they're raising 5 million, 10, 15. I'm like, and their numbers and their revenues crazy. And now, like, I'm speaking to them, 5 years later, and they're like, "Oh, I'm so jealous of you." They're like, I don't sleep at night. All I have to do is," they're like, "I barely even work except for working on my decks
Mhm.
every month. I have to tell my investors what I've done." And this thing is like, and so they don't seem so happy. But listen, one out of, I don't know what it is, 20, 40,
Mhm.
50 of those companies blow up and these become 100 millionaires. I mean, I also don't really, I have no dreams of owning a Ferrari or Lamborghini or
Mhm.
need $100 million. So I don't need that lifestyle. So that's my
Mhm.
personal choice. Yeah.
And one thing you said kind of before was, if you're doing this maybe when you were younger, you might have quit earlier. How do you and this is always a tough question, is how do you know when it is maybe time to quit or time to pivot versus when you're maybe just having to kind of put in that work and kind of push through it? How are you able to balance that, like, optimism of thinking you'll always be able to figure it out versus realizing like, hey, things aren't working, I need to make a change because X, Y, or Z?
I think that when you understand basic finance,
Mhm.
very, very basic, like we have an app we use called Budgeto, like
Mhm.
budgeto.com.
Mhm.
And we plug in the information in there, and like at a certain point, you're like, we are going to go bankrupt. So like, it doesn't matter what we think. Like,
Mhm.
we cannot go bankrupt. So at the very least, if your business isn't going to break even, like you need to have a long, hard chat and say, do you want to keep doing this, or do you want to listen and edit it? Because I mean, the numbers eventually are viciously mean.
Yeah.
So so I think it's just you have to have a real conversation looking at the numbers. And you do listen, you need some pig-headed discipline to ignore them at certain
Mhm.
times. But if you can't keep the lights on, you better look at your company and be like, is this a stupid idea, or is this idea just not finished yet, and how am I going
Mhm.
to edit it?
Mhm.
And like, so even if you're like break even, you see it's going to
Mhm.
do well eventually. Then is it worth the lifestyle now? How long is that lifestyle maintainable? My lifestyle was treacherous the first six
Mhm.
something years. Like, I mean, I had, when I tell you, no life, no time for friends, no nothing.
Mhm.
Like, and then when I was with family, like I wasn't in a good mood because I was
Mhm.
burnt out and exhausted. How long can someone want to sustain that? I mean, I'm so lucky that I have a great family. My business partner is the nicest person. He's an
Mhm.
incredible father to his kids.
Mhm.
He's a good man, and I like being partners with him. I like talking to him.
Mhm.
So I've enjoyed the journey. So I could put up with a lot more
Mhm.
stress, and then we have an incredible team that's fun, and like it's just
Yeah.
so it's a mix of the two.
I think that's one thing that people don't realize is like when it comes to founding a business, especially with co-founders, kind of with other partners, you have to spend a lot of time with them. So you're gonna have to enjoy it, because it's like you said, it's a lot of stress, not always sunshine and rainbows, unless when starting out. So you better enjoy the journey, because that's where you're gonna spend most of your time. And I think a lot of times, especially when kind of talking to anyone or even having success, a lot of times having that like core group of people that can be that support structure that you enjoy working with really makes or breaks it a lot of time, because there's a lot, like you said, a lot of tough meetings, a lot of sleepless nights. But if you like the person you're working with, or can at least get along, it just makes it more enjoyable to kind of push those extra few months to then get to that plateau and kind of get to that level of success.
Yeah,
Which I think,
partnerships are super difficult, and we need to be better partners and work on it. I wish there was a course just on that. Because let's say one of the partners works more, or has to put in more time or more money or more mental energy, or gets more sales or gets more production or does way more. Would you start being furious and angry because that's the logical thing to do? Or do you say it doesn't matter who's working more or who's working less? Is the business way better because of that person? Does that person so I think like they and then and vice versa, like they have to think that way. Because if one of the partner doesn't think that way, it doesn't matter, because you'll always think you're doing more than the other person. Everyone, I mean,
yeah,
we're egomaniacs, humans,
yeah,
and so I think it's important to build the relationship, and like for both partners to learn about themselves and how to put up with the other's shit.
yeah.
In
It's so I remember when I you took a few courses, talked to a few founders. There's always that discussion of like, you're starting a business. Someone's like, well, I have more experience, so I want 55%, you get 45. And they're doing all this fighting. The businesses were zero. So this is all made up. And I remember someone saying that, and they said, give it 50-50 at the beginning. If you're both like, obviously if someone's bringing in cash, that's different, but give it 50-50, because 10 years from now, you don't want during the process of you fighting over that 1%, when it realistically doesn't make a difference. What matters is that business being successful. So I think a lot of times, like you were saying, people will work more hours some weeks and other weeks. And you always think you're always, like you said, you always think you're working harder and that you deserve more. But being able to kind of have those kind of conversations and realize that sometimes one person excels at sales and that early stage from like kind of 0 to 1. And then when it comes to, that 10 to 100 employees, maybe the other person has more, more skill set and kind of develops that is better at that stage. So I think, like you said, it's realizing the kind of having those open conversations of like, hey, output should be the success of this business. And, someone that isn't playing their way,
yeah,
have that discussion, but realizing it's never going to be exactly the same. There's going to be changes and ebbs and flows, and just kind of having to focus on the business as the core thing.
yeah. Nothing will ever be equal in life. Nothing will ever be fair. But if you're open minded, like one person might work an extra 1,000 hours over 6 years. The other person might happen to know someone who knows someone and gets a $5 million sale because of that.
Yeah,
So
it it is super. And that's a great point. Is that like some people compete about hours, but then if you have that network, you're like, hey, I brought in the sale. It took me 10 minutes, but why does it matter how long it took me for having success? And I think it's like you said. I think it's really important to have that, especially when it's found a relationship. Having that relationship, because when things get tough, you get the ego come, no matter how good, there's always a little bit of ego, always thinking you want more, and kind of just being able to kind of work through that, because that just wasted effort that doesn't typically help the success of the business.
takes a lot of energy to fight.
Exactly. So, kind of as this kind of business, scaled and grew, are you only in North America? Are you in Canada, US, just Canada? Kind of what's the scale like at this point?
We sell in a few thousand and thousands of places across Canada. We sell in some interesting spots. We just did all of our U.S. packaging, and we're in the SpaceX office in Texas. We're in the Meta head office in San Francisco, and a few roasters carry
Mhm.
our like Florida, and so we're really growing our barista oat milk and our drinks in the States.
Mhm.
We sell in a bunch of high-end grocery stores in Mexico, and that's really building. And
Mhm.
then randomly, like you'll find us in some nice markets in Chile, in
Oh,
Philippines,
wow.
Taiwan. So it's become pretty cool actually. I remember at one part, someone we work with is from China, and we were selling in Hong Kong, and his aunt just saw it and like bought one, and she's like, hey, isn't this your company, like don't you work there? And like that's just you just we're really are sold in all corners of the world.
That's such a unique kind of, that's wild as it is, like you say, kind of starting on wanting to travel, now having a product that is very global, or at least in many different places, uh, is always so wild. Do you find that in kind of when you're kind of thinking of the business, is coffee culture dramatically answer's probably yes, like dramatically different in different countries? Or are you finding now with the popularity, it's kind of a latte style drink being more consistent across, or have you found different markets require some products being way more popular than others? Or is it a little bit all over the place?
Obvious things are like, flavors
Mhm.
and sweetness levels. You know, in
Interesting.
in
Mhm.
in Mexico they have a lot sweeter tooth than we do in Canada. So there is things like that. But it's also interesting to see the travel through time, whereas you could see something happen in the States. Okay, zero refined sugar is going to be huge, low calorie, clean ingredients. Then, like, 5, 10 years later, it's big in Canada. And now it's really becoming popular in Mexico. So
Oh,
sometimes it's not even what it is, it's just the timing.
I guess that's the interesting thing, especially about any product, is even if you have the greatest formulation, in 5 years, consumer tastes might change, especially with new flavors, kind of ebbs and flows. Just because anything in life, people change. What's hot right now, or the flavor profile changes. And I think that's always an interesting challenge, because my background's mostly in like tech or SaaS a little bit more, where it's pretty consistent.
Mm.
Businesses kind of all need businesses things. Where on the BSC side, or at least on the human side, person that like there's a lot more, at least from outside looking in, there's a lot more changes within the culture, at least uh the flavor profiles, what people enjoy quicker, I would think, on the individual level than on the business level.
Well, and also we're selling healthy energy, and people have
Yeah.
been needing energy since they first found the first coffee plant. So,
And I mean, even right now, obviously, a lot of these like healthier products, when I was, especially like I said, I was saying, and I was in Vancouver, this was the norm. Everyone was very health conscious. I talked to a bunch of founders there, and most of them had like healthy food options. In Toronto, no one's talking about food, which is it's just such a funny thing living on the West Coast. How this isn't a like you don't say you're a premium shopper if you're buying organic foods. It's well, that's what I eat. We're kind of on this side of the side of Canada. It's completely opposite. Someone brings in the organic salad, you think, wow, they're spending big dollars here, not realizing that health is wealth, that eating healthy typically pays off in your output, how you feel.
mm.
So it is very interesting, even from Vancouver, to hear how different their approach is to health. But I'm seeing it more and more, that health, no, it's not health conscious, it's like healthy lifestyle, where trying to get away from these refined sugars and processed goods.
The West Coast lifestyle is all about that. So I mean, even look, yeah, you're talking about the differences in countries. Look at the differences even in our own. Like the West Coast,
Mhm.
you better be healthy. You're hiking, you're biking, you're boating, and you're doing all sorts of stuff. You just need that healthy lifestyle. Whereas in like Toronto, you're working ungodly hours to pay your rent, and you're lucky if you go for a walk through the concrete jungle
Mhm.
and and then you land up drinking because you're like, oh,
Mhm.
let's meet for a beer, let's meet for drinks, and blow off some steam from the tough week. Just generally speaking,
Mhm.
obviously, but that's kind of the major difference. Whereas like in the West Coast, like you said, it's just they've always been ahead of the health
Mhm.
food game. Like people always thought we were a West Coast company and we were selling very well on the West Coast, even though we were making it in Toronto.
Mhm. And I even saw, like you were saying before, I saw your product with the barista kind of oat milk and kind of milk like that. Was that a newer? Has that been around for a while, or was that kind of additional add-on now that kind of getting that product not just in the ready-made level, but allowing to make the homemade drinks, kind of the cappuccinos using your product? Was that a newer thing, or was it always been around?
No,
It's the first time I noticed it was a few days
we
ago.
we were pioneers. I mean, there was one other company,
Mhm.
um, and we were making oat milk for our lattes, and we're like, this is insane. Like we owned a coffee shop. We're like, why are we buying? We had to actually buy our barista oat milk from the UK because there was no good oat milk,
Wow.
and we're like,
Mhm.
why are we not just making one? But it took 3.5 years from the time we launched it to the time it's unbelievable. Like it was just the last month. Like it wouldn't froth well. It wouldn't like on home make no froth. It would start to work. Then a month later, they wouldn't work. And it was just disaster. Like talk about 3.5 years. Like our company would have been selling 5 to 10 times more volume if 3.5 years ago the product worked. So it was really hard to make a clean ingredient, gluten free, tasty, neutral tasting oat milk in a Tetra Pak. And 3.5 years later, we nailed it. And like we're so lucky, cafes are like converting like crazy. Like we literally can't make it fast enough at this point.
That's what, like, outside looking in, you're like, oat milk's oat milk. Why does it matter? But having to try, even, buying regular oat milk and trying to make a frothy drink, it just doesn't work. I mean, there's no fats compared to like normal lactose milk. And it's one of those
Mm.
things where it's like, oh, there is a massive difference. So it's really interesting kind of hearing that story, how trying to develop this product it's not easy. And there's not many
Oh,
products out there that work on that level. Not even, like I was saying, like you would never even realize that. You would just be like, oh, you just oats squeeze them, I guess. But there's so much
it's an
more than that in the
enzymatic
process.
process. And to really run a test, you have to do a batch. And like when we run productions, like you're running almost 200,000 liters. So when a batch isn't right, I mean, it's a disaster. We've had disasters. Like, I mean, I don't know how like most people would survive this. Like,
Mhm.
this is painful. But 3.5 years later, that's what I was saying to you
Mhm.
earlier. Like now, I'm like, oh man, we got a company here. This is amazing because everything's working together after
Mhm.
years. The packaging is 10 times better than it used to be. Like the size of the writing, what pictograms to tell consumers, like every mistake we've made for the last
Mhm.
9 years, I really think is fixed. Like the only thing we're missing now is the right marketing for more people to know
Mhm.
how good these products are.
And one thing on like the CPG side is like packaging such a big part. Do you think, especially when early founders, do you think they overemphasize how important packaging is, or do you think it is that important? We're like, hey, you should invest in this, even if your product's amazing. If no one picks it up off the shelf or looks at it, kind of how do you figure out that balance, or is it just kind of learn as you go to see how much effort to put into packaging versus the product and kind of balancing that process?
I think it is so much more important than anyone believes. You know, when you go to a store and you're fighting against Coca-Cola and Starbucks and all these companies, all we have, if nobody's heard of us, is the label. And so not only does the label have to catch your attention with the colors, everything needs to be cohesive. If you have multiple SKUs, does it make your eye put it all into one block and look like it's one thing so it catches their attention? Then once they've seen it, are they going to remember the logo? Do they easily identify what it is? The placement of like, okay, you know, first the brand, then the product, then the flavor, then the benefits, and like, does it look delicious? The psychology is bonkers, and I'm so fortunate that we have a great agency that helps with design. And then my cousin, she used to work at Coca Cola, helping launch brands. And
Oh wow.
so she's given me so much of her time out of kindness that has changed the game. Understanding like, oh, this benefit's more important. It needs to go to the left, or don't put that benefit on consumers. Like you use like direct trade and good ethical coffee. She's like, consumers, they say they care, but it could be on the back. They actually don't. They just
Mhm.
say they do. They'll buy it on three other reasons. So you do what you think is right, but what you think is right, maybe not the order for the consumer
Yeah.
of the psychology of their purchase.
And that's so interesting about even like you said, the consumer mindset. I remember back in the day reading about things when it's like, hey, if there's a healthy product, this was more in the bar sales. They're like, if you say healthy, your sales will be less because people are like, oh, that won't taste good. So then you're like, well, you want a healthy product, and people say they want a healthy product. When it comes to it, they're like, do I really want? I want sugar. So it's one of those things like you're saying. It's like not only building a product of value, but how you show it and understand what the customer's saying versus what they actually want. And kind of, I remember there was an ad, this was like years ago, where they, like KD went from, I think they made a cauliflower version of their product, and they just didn't tell anyone and they just sold it. And then 6 months later, they said, hey, by the way, this is all cauliflower. We just want to tell you because you wouldn't have the kids would start complaining, oh, this tastes like vegetables. So it's one of those things where it's like, there's so, like you said, there's so much to it. And it is a very interesting space getting into psychology of it, but then also figuring out what the customers actually want and how to position against these massive brands that really don't have to do much to get their attention because it's top of mind when every time they're just going through the store, kind of what they're going in for at the beginning.
And you know what? Listening too, like when before we launched the label edit, sometimes I put stuff on LinkedIn, and I'm so fortunate that sometimes I can get like tens of thousands of views and hundreds of comments, and and like I really read every single one of them, write notes, go back to the team, say these are the notes I think were important. What do you think? And then we literally change the packaging based on what people say.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, your LinkedIn has been pretty enjoyable. I saw kind of showing up on your TikTok to Drake's house for dropping off the coffee and these fun little things. And I think
Uh,
on the, even on the like, I've been seeing this more and more on the, even on the CPG side of things, like a company is a part of the founder. So kind of understanding you as yourself adds to the brand. Like if you're living it, it just adds more fuel to the fire to be a part of that product. It's not a nameless corporation. I think that makes such a big difference, especially as you scale an organization.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I try to fight it because I hate it because I'm not like that. Like I don't even have Instagram on my phone. I got to look at it on my computer because I don't want to be too involved. But LinkedIn has helped build the business. It's been very helpful. So, as an old, like, I mean, I'm middle aged. I didn't grow up like with a smartphone.
Mhm.
So it's a real fight to realize, you better play the game. This is,
It is one of those things, and it's I talked to a lot, even when I was working with other founders, where it's like, hey, I don't like to show off or be a part of the social media like LinkedIn thing, but then you realize, like, again, sometimes the stuff you don't enjoy really helps scale your business, and for some, that's the LinkedIn part. Like, you might not enjoy it, but if you can find your authentic voice, and it's like a muscle. Once you get used to it, you kind of figure out what works for you and kind of what is your voice for doing it. It can make such a big difference, and I've been seeing it
I
more and
think
more.
doing,
Like, yeah.
no, just doing things that actually you believe. Like if people sometimes just try to be fake and they're like, what's going to work? What's going to get likes? Like that will make you miserable and it
Mhm.
unfun and just whack. Like, so
Mhm.
I think it's just like, you can't care if people like you or not. It's like, when I post it, I'm like, you know what? Like, people going to trash talk me. Who cares? People going to say I post too much or they don't like my face or I shouldn't put my face on. Who cares? Like, I don't care.
And yeah, it's funny. And when you start doing your authentic self, you find people who just gravitate towards that, and then you really build that strong brand connection because it's hard. Like, and you know, this is hard to understand. But like, people can tell if it's being fake, or very easily start finding out what's fake, and you kind of burn bridges there very quickly. But being your authentic self just helps get people to say, like, hey, this is what we're trying. I'd love to get that feedback, and getting that feedback is so important. I think that's one thing any business or founder can learn, is like that thing that's like building in public. That's debatable how public you want to be with some things, but at least just getting feedback from your customers is always extremely important for anything and any business within life. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, kind of as we wrap up here, just to kind of, I guess maybe one question I always like to ask to end it off is, because you've had some successes, some challenges, is anything easier than you thought with running an organization and being a founder? And is there anything that's a lot harder from the outside looking in that maybe people might think is super easy that is not that case? I know that's a pretty big question. But anything top of mind come to you?
I almost laughed when you said, "Is anything easier?" Nothing's easy. Um, Honestly, just showing up every day is actually easier than people think. Like
Mm,
literally all you have to do is show up and just try to improve a little every day. And like
yeah.
after years, you'll have a business. It's just literally showing up. You know, it's one of the best, I think, expressions. I'm obviously going to misquote it, but it was,
Mhm,
you know, don't let starting be the thing that stops you.
mhm,
And so people are always nervous to start new ideas and start
mhm.
concepts. It's like just you actually just have to just do something. And like
Yeah.
it might be crappy, and like
Mhm,
the next day it might be less crappy. And
mhm,
so I think that is basically the easiest thing. The hardest thing is like I didn't get a crazy education.
mhm,
I didn't really understand numbers and finance, and I was
mhm,
just kind of like hustling, and not in the
mhm.
bad negative words. It's just like this is how you do it, you know.
Yeah.
And I mean, I guess it seemed as a bad word. I don't see it as a
Mhm,
bad word, but so I think really trying to learn the financial side and
mhm,
understanding loans and
mhm,
cost of doing business and margins and everything. And I'd say that took me a lot harder,
mhm,
a lot longer to really understand numbers, not just like, oh, like it makes money on this, do it. It's like,
mhm,
how much money does it make, but how much energy is it taking to invest in that part of the business? If your margins are better here,
mhm,
and your time should be placed there. So time and margins, I guess.
mhm. And it's funny you touch on that. I remember talking to some older founders, and they said the best thing they ever did was they took an accounting course early on, and they were like, just understanding where the money's going is just adds, like you said, adds that clarity of like, okay, now someone like there's, I mean, you always hear those horse stories. Now it's not someone saying like, oh, you should do this or this. You can at least understand the language a little bit to be like, oh, okay, you're telling me to do this because this has, better margins or better return. I can at least understand the lingo a little bit to be able to make those guidance, not just rely on outside voices. Yeah, it's actually great advice because I think I'm from sales as well. And you're like, oh, just sell. It doesn't matter. Just work hard. But picking a direction and being in the right direction makes a dramatic difference for growing fast. And I think that's a big thing. It's almost hard to sometimes take a step back and reassess where you're putting your effort is
Mm,
always important.
yeah, and I
Um,
think the last thing I would definitely say, and the only advice I can literally put my whole life on, is get mentors, a consultant, smarter people. We've been so fortunate. Some people just helped out of goodwill. There's been some like a guy who sold his business for $120 million, and like just literally will give me an hour of his time pretty often. And like what I learned in that hour changes our business.
mhm,
A successful person I know, a cousin has a company. He's given me crazy advice. We have a consultant that used to work at Unilever.
mhm,
And so he never tells us what to ask us why. Why?
mhm,
So I mean, I've heard him say why so many times, and you even get mad sometimes. But you actually realize you're mad at yourself because you're like, why the heck did I do that? You know. But it's to have smarter people really understanding your company and making you understand it, like asking
mhm,
good questions. So I think as many people, like I used to be really scared to tell anybody anything about our business. I thought it was so secretive, and now I realize I love talking about it because I learned
mhm.
so much from other people about the dumb things I'm doing or we're doing. You know.
Yeah. And I think that's one thing you just touched on is like initially you're like, oh, it has to be a secret. The classic, they're gonna steal my idea. And then you talk to successful people and they're like, I got 1,000 other issues to worry. I am
Mm,
not gonna steal your idea. I'm working on other things. And I think as being a founder, like the idea is one thing, and then the 9 years to build it. If you want to take another 10 years, I can't compete. Sure, I guess, but at that level, it's one of those things where it's just the effort, and getting advice is so important, so helpful, especially from others who've done it, to be like, hey, what are we like, kind of what pothole are you about to run over that you can help us avoid? And a lot of times simple in hindsight, but in the moment you're like, I would never even thought of that being an issue or that being a challenge.
And who cares about other people doing it? We've got competition. Like,
Mhm.
I don't spend 10 minutes a year caring what they're doing. If they're nice people, I wish them well. I could care less. Like, we are trying to make a better product every single day and make what our consumers want and make the brand better. And like, let them do what they're doing. Don't worry about your competition.
Mhm.
Just make sure you're doing a better job. Like, and I used to think so much about competition just 5, 8 years ago. Now I like literally could care less. I'd be friends with them. It means
Yeah.
nothing to me. Let them do their thing.
It, it's one of those things where you just kind of have to work on your, like you said, work on your own story, work on your own product, and the customers will notice. But yeah, it was great, kind of great chatting, kind of learning about your story and all of these lessons, especially through trials and tribulations, and now kind of having a product I'm seeing more and more, even over the past year, especially in the grocery store with the oat milk. Is just one thing that yesterday I was shopping. I'm like, oh, they have oat milk now. I need to
Mhm.
get some. So it's just an interesting kind of seeing the business grow and kind of being another Canadian company as well.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah, it's exciting.